3 months after her divorce, Amelia finally thought she was free. No more insults, no more control, no more begging for basic respect. Then one phone call shattered the silence. Her ex-mother-in-law was screaming from a hospital, demanding $35,000 to save the man who betrayed her. The same family that treated her like a servant now wanted her to become their rescuer. But this time, Amelia was no longer the broken wife they remembered. This time, she had the power to say no.
This all started with a phone call. One call from my ex-mother-in-law, 3 months after my divorce, that rocked my world and finally put my horrible past where it belonged. If you like stories like this, make sure you subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Your support really means the world to us. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when my phone shattered the peace. I was on my balcony, holding a warm mug of chamomile tea, completely lost in a book I was halfway through. It was a calm I hadn't felt in 5 long years, a peace I thought I'd lost for good. My screen lit up with an unknown number that still sent a chill down my spine. I frowned, hesitated, then swiped to answer. Hello, a sharp, frantic voice cut through the phone, tangled with the wail of sirens and shouting in the background. Amelia, you need to get to Massachusetts General Hospital now. It's Ethan. Ethan's been in a terrible car crash. It's bad, really bad. The doctors have to operate right away. But his insurance expired, and we need $35,000 for the surgeon's deposit. You have to bring the money and save your husband. If you're not fast, he'll die. I just froze. That voice so arrogant, so demanding. I'd know that voice anywhere. It was my ex-mother-in-law, Margaret. But wait, your husband? What was she even talking about? I placed my mug on the table, the soft clink echoing the silence. I took a deep breath, hoping the chamomile would calm my pounding heart. And then I just laughed. A small, bitter chuckle filled with more contempt than I knew I had. Excuse me. You must have the wrong number, I said, my voice calm and ice-cold. Or perhaps your memory is failing you. A beat of silence, then a shriek so loud I thought it would blow out my speaker. What are you talking about? I'm your mother-in-law, Ethan's mother. Your husband is in the emergency room bleeding to death. You're his wife. Now get the money and save him. $35,000. The number just rolled off her tongue so easily. Did she think I had a magical money tree? Or did she really think I was the same broken, submissive Amelia from 3 months ago? I stood and walked to my balcony railing, watching the city move below. The evening breeze played with my hair. It smelled like freedom, a freedom I had paid for with blood and tears. Margaret, I said, using her first name, dropping the old title for good. I think you might need to check your calendar. It's been 3 months since the divorce was finalized. Your son, Ethan, and I are legally strangers now. So why would I care if he lives or dies, gets in a crash, or gets sick? Why on earth would you ask me for $35,000? Who are you to me now? On the other end, I could hear her gasping for air. She was clearly in shock. Maybe stunned that her little doormat of a daughter-in-law was finally talking back to her. Or maybe she finally realized her power over me had vanished completely. You, how dare you talk to me that way? After everything, you were married for years. There has to be some feeling left. Here's my son. Can you really just let him die? You are a heartless woman. I'll tell everyone what you're really like. There it was, her usual routine of threats and emotional blackmail.
I actually smiled, a bitter taste filling my mouth. Affection? You have the nerve to bring up affection?
Where was the affection the night you and your son threw me out in the pouring rain? Where was it when Ethan left me bruised and bleeding to protect his little mistress? And what about when you told him to hide every penny during the divorce, so he'd walk away with absolutely nothing, empty-handed with a daughter to raise? I paused, swallowing hard. It was like she was tearing open old wounds I thought had finally scarred over, but this time it didn't hurt. It just felt pathetic. Margaret, I heard your son is getting married again, isn't he? To that young woman, Isabel. She's so lovely and successful, right? Comes from a wealthy family, I hear. And she's pregnant with that grandson you always wanted. Why don't you call her? She certainly has the money. Ask her to bring the cash to save her fiancé. Don't embarrass yourself by calling the ex-wife. The other end of the line went completely quiet. All I could hear was her ragged breath and the chaos of the hospital. I knew I'd hit a nerve. Something must have gone wrong with that perfect new daughter-in-law for Margaret to swallow her pride and call me the woman she threw away. Isabel, that woman. Margaret's voice suddenly cracked. All the fight and arrogance just gone. That woman took all the money and vanished. I'm begging you, Amelia, please. Just this one time. Save Ethan. I'm begging you. I'm sorry. But I'm not a saint and I'm not a bank. That $35,000 is for my daughter's future.
You know, the granddaughter you called a worthless burden. Goodbye. I pressed the end call button hard.
The screen went dark, and the dial tone felt like it was severing the final tie to that toxic family. I sank back into my chair. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from years of rage, finally bubbling to the surface. It had only been 3 months since he'd walked out of that house for the last time. They probably imagined I was struggling in some tiny, miserable apartment, that I'd come crawling back, begging them to take me in. But life has a funny way of working out. The Amelia of today wasn't the same woman they broke. And Ethan, the man who left me for her, was now lying in a hospital bed, abandoned by his precious mistress. Karma. It sounds like some New Age concept, but I was watching it play out in real time, sharp and cruel. I took a sip of my tea, the sweet honey and bitter herbs mixed on my tongue. My mind drifted back 5 years to the day I first walked into Margaret's house as her son's wife. Back then, I was so naive, I actually believed in the idea of family. I poured my heart, my youth, and every dollar I earned into that home. My reward? A cold-blooded betrayal that chilled me to my soul.
I was an architectural designer, making $8,000 a month, and I had to hand my entire paycheck over to her. Every morning,
she gave me just $20 for groceries. I gave my husband everything, never realizing he was cheating on me for 2 years, right under my own roof. And the worst part? They tried to trick me into co-signing a loan, supposedly for his business. But it was all for her. The story of my disastrous marriage and my journey to get my life back has only just begun. What Margaret just told me on the phone was only the beginning. Why was Ethan in that hospital bed? Who was this mistress, Isabel? Really? And how did I finally turn the tables on them? My tea was cold now, but the bitter taste of that phone call lingered, pulling at all my old memories. I closed my eyes, letting the breeze wash over me as my mind went back 5 years. I was 25, so full of love and hope, walking into Margaret's house in my wedding dress. Everyone told me I was so lucky. My new husband, Ethan, seemed so smart and gentle, the only son of a family, with a gorgeous brownstone in Boston's Back Bay. And me? I was just a girl from a small town in Maine, but I'd graduated top of my class from a great university and had a design job with a salary my friends envied. In my new in-laws' eyes, though, I was just some girl from the sticks. But you never really know a family until you're a part of it. That perfect-looking house was actually a beautiful prison where my youth and my freedom went to die. On our wedding night, before we'd even opened our gifts, Margaret called me into the living room. She sat there in this huge, carved armchair and handed me a list of house rules with a stone-cold expression. "Amelia, you are very fortunate to have married into our family. So let me be clear about my expectations. It's a small family. Ethan's father died when he was young, so I raised him by myself. I won't see my son taken advantage of starting. Now I will manage both of your salaries, yours and Ethan's." I was so stunned, I could barely speak. What, but Margaret, were adults. We want to manage our own finances and save for our future. Save for what? Margaret's voice was like ice. "You young people just waste money as soon as you get it. I'm doing this for your own good. If you need something important, I'll provide the money. Or are you accusing me of stealing?" Ethan agrees with me. A wife listens to her husband. I looked over at my new husband, waiting for him to step in. But Ethan just kept his head down, peeling an apple. "Just let my mum handle it, honey," he said. "She's better with money than we are. Don't be so suspicious of her." His words felt like a slap in the face, but I was newly married and just wanted to keep the peace. So I swallowed my pride and gave her access to my bank account. And just like that, I became a highly paid but unpaid servant. Every morning, I'd wake up before sunrise to clean our massive 4-story Austin home, then run to the farmer's market for breakfast supplies. Brenda was a tyrant about food. Leo's morning smoothie needed 10 different organic ingredients, each washed and prepared perfectly. Then I'd race to my design agency, working under crushing deadlines as the head of my team. In the afternoon, when my colleagues would go for happy hour, I'd have to speed home to start on dinner. Leo would get back from his startup, plant himself on the sofa with his laptop, and wait for me to serve him. Brenda would come home from her yoga class and find something to critique: a stray crumb on the counter, or the soup having too much salt. But the finances were the worst part. I made $6,000 a month, Leo made $3,000, and Brenda controlled all of it. Every Monday, she'd hand me exactly $50 for the week. Use this wisely, and don't spend it on anything frivolous, she'd say, staring at the cash like I was about to steal it. $50 for a week of groceries in a city like Austin. I had to get creative, hitting discount stores at dawn and searching for deals on produce for my husband's demanding palate. I started skipping lunch, filling up on water at the office just to save a few dollars for our food budget. Once, for my agency's annual awards night, I needed a new dress. My closet was full of old college outfits. I worked up the nerve to ask Brenda for $200. She looked at me like Idi just asked for a kidney. "New dress? Who are you trying to impress? You're a married woman. Wear what you have. $200 could feed a family for a month. Stop being so wasteful." I was so ashamed. I just ran to our room and started crying, trying to tell Leo about it. He was busy on his phone and just scowled at me. "My mom has a point, it's just a dress. You look beautiful in anything, even sweats." In that moment I saw him clearly. My husband wasn't just weak, he was cruel. He was so used to his mother running our lives that he just accepted my misery as normal to them. I was just a walking paycheck and a maid. I seriously considered divorce, but then I saw 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. A baby coming at my lowest point became the one thing tying me to that house. I told myself to just hang on, that for the baby's sake, things would get better. Once we had a grandchild, Brenda would soften up, and Leo would finally mature. I was so wrong. My quiet sacrifices weren't appreciated. They were completely destroyed by the arrival of a third person. She stepped into our lives and blew our fake family apart. When my daughter Mia turned 2, Leo's career took off. His tech startup secured a new round of funding, making him a minor celebrity. His salary didn't change, but suddenly there were endless dinners and meetings. I noticed Leo started acting different. He obsessed over his appearance, wearing expensive cologne every time he left, and his phone never left his side. He changed the password, always kept it face down, and would take quiet, later-night calls out on the patio. My gut screamed that something was wrong, but every time I brought it up, Leo would just shut me down. Stop being so paranoid. I'm stressed enough with work, without you acting like a detective. And if Brenda heard us arguing, she always defended him. He's out there, building an empire for you and your daughter, and you're acting like a jealous child. A suspicious wife is a foolish wife, she'd say. So I bit my tongue, until one day, while Leo was in the shower, I found a receipt in his gym bag, a receipt from Tiffany's to my Isabel, my forever. I love you, P.S. The baby booties are for our little prince. The sender was named Isabel. My entire world just collapsed. Our little prince. That meant Leo had another son somewhere. With shaking hands, I grabbed his phone. I'd seen him type in the new passcode just last night. Inside were hundreds of romantic messages and photos of Leo with a beautiful, sophisticated-looking woman. It was Isabel, a new partner at his venture capital firm. But the photos weren't what broke me.
It was the credit card statements I found in his email. Darling, I need $200 for my prenatal massage.
Sweetheart, this new bugaboo stroller is only $1,500. You'll get it for me, won't you? And his reply, of course. Just ask my mom for the money and send it right over. My knees felt weak. The salary I worked so hard for wasn't going into savings like Brenda claimed. It was going straight to Leo to fund his secret second family. And then I saw it. Scrolling back through older messages, a conversation between Leo and his mother. Mom, Isabel had the ultrasound. The doctor is 99% sure it's a boy, your grandson. Brenda's reply was instant. Really? Oh, that's wonderful news. Well done, son. I was so sick of you only having a daughter. For now, keep Ava in the dark. Once Isabel gives birth, we'll figure out what to do. If you need money, just ask with Ava's salary. We can easily support my grandson. I dropped the phone. The sound it made, hitting the sheets, felt like my own heart breaking. This entire family was a team of professional liars. The woman I'd served for 5 years was actively helping her son cheat on me, using my money to pay for his mistress baby. It was all because of her twisted, old-fashioned need for a male heir. For my daughter Mia, her own flesh and blood, she'd never once bought a toy or a piece of clothing. She called her that little girl. But for this unborn son of a stranger, she would burn my life to the ground to support him. Rage, betrayal, and pain swirled inside me until I could barely breathe. I wanted to storm out there and tear their smiling masks off. But the logical part of my brain, the part that ran a design team, took over. If I caused a scene now, I'd get nothing. Leo would deny everything and leave with her. Brenda would throw me and my daughter out onto the street without a second thought. All the assets were in their names. I didn't have a single penny saved. I would lose my daughter and be left with nothing. I had to calm down. I needed a plan. I had to get them out of my life and take back everything they stole from me. I dried my eyes, put the phone back exactly where I found it, and took a deep breath. Leo came out of the bathroom, whistling a happy tune. I just kept folding Maya's clothes, my face as calm as a placid lake. Done with your shower? Are you eating at home tonight? I asked, my voice impossibly sweet. No, I've got a late dinner with investors. I'll be home very late, don't wait up for me, Leo said, combing his hair and spraying on that cologne. I knew now it wasn't for me. Okay, drive safe. As I watched him walk out the door, my smile evaporated. My expression turned to ice. Enjoy your little fantasy while it lasts, because these are the last happy days you will ever have. Now that I knew the truth, I started digging into Isabel. Who was she really? And why was she targeting a man like Leo, more importantly? I found out Leo and Brenda were planning to steal the only thing I owned, a commercial lot my parents had given me. What did they want with my land? And how could I flip their own scheme back on them? Was the truth about Isabel and her baby boy really that simple? From that night on, I moved through that house like a ghost, waiting for my moment. On the surface, I was the same dutiful wife. I worked, cooked, and cleaned, but inside, my heart had turned to stone. I knew this quiet was just the calm before the hurricane, and that storm hit sooner than I expected, driven by the pure greed of that mother and son. One evening, Brenda actually went into the kitchen and made my favourite pasta dish. Served me a huge portion, her smile so fake it made my skin crawl. Leo was just as strange, sitting beside me, constantly asking about my work. After dinner, Brenda sat us both down in the living room. She poured tea, cleared her throat, and began. Ava, Leo's company is doing so well. He has a chance to franchise, but has a little short on capital. I was thinking you could help your husband. I took a slow sip of my tea, hiding a smirk. Help him? How you control my entire salary? Where would I get any money? Brenda paused, then went straight for the kill. Your parents gave you that commercial lot out by the new tech campus, right? I hear its value has gone up. You should go convince them to sell it. With that money, we can salvage Ethan's startup. When your husband succeeds, you succeed too, right, Clara? Beside her, he chimed in, his eyes gleaming. Yes, honey. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Sell the cabin. I swear, I'll pay you back in 2 years. I'll buy you a lake house twice the size. I stared at the mother and son with utter disgust. That cabin was my only escape, a place my parents built with their life savings, and they had the nerve to ask me to sell it. In truth, after finding Ethan's secret bank statements, I already knew all about the business opportunity they were pushing. There was no startup to save. The reality was, Ethan had buried himself in debt from bad investments and a high-risk lifestyle. The losses were in the tens of thousands, and his lenders were threatening to send collectors. On top of that, his mistress Amber was threatening to end her pregnancy if he didn't lease a luxury downtown apartment for her. Ethan and Judith were completely trapped. They couldn't sell their own suburban home without looking like failures to the whole neighborhood, so they targeted my only real asset. They planned to drain me of everything to pay off his debts and keep his mistress happy. That cabin is in my parents' names. I've no right to sell it, I said flatly, setting my coffee mug down hard. Judith's smile froze on her face. Well, go work on your parents. You're their only daughter. Who else would they leave it to? Does it kill you to help your husband? His entire future is on the line. His future or a mountain of debt? I asked, looking directly at Ethan. He jumped, spilling his water all over the table. What are you talking about, I'm a serious entrepreneur? What debt? Fine, I said, faking a sigh and standing up. I'll think about it. It's a huge decision. I need some time. I walked to my room, leaving the two of them sitting there with sour expressions. Later that night, I heard them arguing in Judith's study. "Mum, she's being so difficult. If she doesn't sell that cabin, I'm ruined. The investors want their money next week, and Amber is threatening to walk. Just relax. I will handle her. If she won't listen to reason, we'll have to get tough. She lives under our roof, and we have her daughter. Where is she going to go? If we apply enough pressure, she'll break eventually." Hearing those cold, calculating words, I knew I had to move fast. They didn't see me as family, just a solution. I had to act first. The next day I called in sick to my job. I collected all my vital documents and the deed to the cabin that I kept hidden, and locked them in a bank's safe deposit box. For proof, I also installed a tiny hidden camera in the living room, but I never imagined their cruelty went beyond just wanting my money. Their greed and lust pushed us toward that terrible stormy night I can never forget. On a Friday evening, a message popped up from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo of Ethan with his arm around a woman, walking into a boutique hotel downtown. The message was just as ugly. "Hey there, just wanted you to know. Your husband is taking great care of me and our baby. You keep the house warm, okay?" The sender was obviously Amber. She was trying to provoke me. She wanted me to have a meltdown and leave, clearing the way for her to move in. My blood was boiling. I had reached my limit. I dropped my daughter off at my mom's and ordered a rideshare to the address in the picture. I wasn't going there for a fight. I was going to end this whole lie with a three-way confrontation right outside room 302. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I took a steadying breath and knocked. "Who is it?" Ethan's voice slurred from the other side. "Room service." The door creaked open. Ethan stood there, wearing just a towel, his face flushed from drinking. Inside, Amber was lounging on the bed in a silky robe, rubbing her small baby bump with a look of pure victory. Seeing me, Ethan's face went white as a sheet. "Clara, what are you doing here?" I ignored him. I walked into the room and stared Amber down. She didn't look the least bit scared. In fact, she just smirked and propped herself up on her elbows. "Hi, Clara. Perfect timing. Ethan just promised he'd get a new place for me and our baby." "Ethan," I said, turning to my husband, my voice shaking with fury. "Where exactly are you getting the money for her new place? From selling my parents' cabin, or from the freelance money you've been siphoning from my account for years?" Ethan glanced between Amber and me, totally paralyzed. Amber just pouted. "Don't be so mean to him. He's the man of the house. What's wrong with him using a little of your money? In giving him something you couldn't. A son. You should be thanking me. Thanking you." I laughed, but it sounded like a sob. "Thank you for being a conniving, home-wrecking parasite. You think he loves you? He's using that baby to get money from his mother, and you're just after his wallet. You two deserve each other. Disgusting." "Shut up," Ethan suddenly screamed, stepping toward me. "How dare you insult Amber? She's pregnant with my son. Your son? Are you even sure it's your son?" I shot back, voicing a doubt it had for weeks. That one sentence lit the fuse. Amber started wailing, putting on a big show. "Honey, she's putting a curse on our baby. Does she want me to lose our child? Do something." Ethan, drunk and desperate to protect his mistress, swung his hand without a second thought. The crack of the slap echoed in the room, followed by a searing pain in my cheek. I staggered backward and fell, my head cracking against the corner of the nightstand. Blood began to seep down my temple. I looked up at the man I once loved. He just stood there, fists clenched, eyes wild, with absolutely no regret. Get out of my sight. "You crazy witch," Ethan roared. I pulled myself to my feet and wiped the blood from my brow. I looked at Amber, who was smiling, and at Ethan, who looked like a cornered animal. Nothing mattered anymore. I was done crying. "I'm leaving. You can have this piece of trash. I hope you two are very happy together." I bolted from the hotel and got a taxi straight back to their house. I had to talk to Judith. I held onto a tiny hope that even if she was greedy, she was still a mother and a grandmother. I thought if she knew her son had hit his pregnant wife for a mistress, some part of her conscience would wake up. I was dead wrong. By the time I got home, a storm had started. I walked into the house, soaked to the bone with blood on my face. Judith was watching television and barely looked up. "What on earth happened to you? Have you lost your mind? What is with that look? Are you trying to bring shame on this family?" "Judith," I said, my voice breaking. "Ethan is cheating on me. He hit me. He's been spending our money on that woman." I expected her to be shocked, to ask me what was wrong, but no. Judith just took a slow sip of her wine, her eyes glued to the TV, and said coldly, "I know." I froze. She knew. She knew the whole time and did nothing. She had let her son betray me. Judith finally turned to me with a look of pure contempt. I will never forget. "What's the big deal if a man has a little fun on the side? The important thing is Amber is giving us a grandson. She's clever and beautiful. What have you ever done for this family? You gave us one girl, counted every penny, and refused to sell a useless cabin to help your husband. You are a worthless wife. Judith, don't you dare talk to me like that. It makes my skin crawl." She stood up and pointed a finger at the door. "Ethan called me. He told me you acted like a hysterical child and insulted his girlfriend. We don't need a daughter-in-law like you here. If you have any self-respect, get out of my house right now. That way, I can finally bring Amber here. I'm not about to let my precious grandson be raised by strangers." "You're throwing me out, in the middle of a storm?" I asked, shivering. "Get out now, or do you want to make a scene?" With that, she stormed into my room, shoved a few of my things into an old suitcase, and literally threw it out onto the porch. "And don't you even think of taking anything else? You said Maya is with your parents? Good, let her stay there. We have no interest in raising another useless girl in this house." I stood on the porch in the freezing, driving rain, the blood from my head mixed with the downpour. My suitcase was soaking in a puddle. The heavy front door slammed shut, cutting off every last bit of hope. I looked up at the big suburban house, the place where I'd spent 5 years of my life, cleaning every corner and cooking every meal. Now it was just a cold prison that had cast me out. That awful night, dragging my heavy bag. I stumbled away from the neighborhood. I never looked back. I knew I had just escaped from hell. I was hurt, and I was humiliated. Yes, but I was free, and I swore that the people who threw my daughter and me out into the street that night would pay for it. I called a cab, went to my parents' house, held my daughter in my arms, and just cried. After that night, I returned to my childhood home, broken and bruised. My parents were horrified to see their daughter so thin and their granddaughter so scared. My dad, who was always a calm man, slammed his fist on the table and yelled, "You're divorcing him immediately. This house has more than enough room for you and your daughter. Don't waste another thought on those awful people." Thanks to my parents' support, I called a lawyer the very next morning. Figured it would be a clean break, a quick signature, and we'd go our separate ways. But I completely underestimated the venom of Margaret and her son for them. A divorce wasn't an ending. but one last chance to bleed me dry before casting me aside for good. That first mediation hearing felt like I couldn't breathe. Margaret and Ethan arrived at the courthouse with their lawyer, and a couple of strangers I'd later learn were paid liars. Ethan sat across from me, all the rage from that night gone, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. He never once met my eyes, keeping his gaze fixed on his stack of papers. When the judge asked about our assets and custody of Maya, Ethan's lawyer stood and delivered a speech that knocked the wind out of me. Your Honour, my client is requesting sole custody. Miss Clara Martin is not a fit mother. She has a history of infidelity, neglects her home, and has no stable income or residence. She's living with her parents. I shot out of my chair yelling, that is a complete lie. He's the one who cheated. He has another woman and a baby on the way with her. Margaret immediately cut in, jabbing a finger in my direction. Don't you dare raise your voice. My son is a good man. Who knows who you were sleeping with on all those nights you claimed to be working late? She slapped a folder of printed screenshots on the table, showing DMS between me and a male co-worker. The messages, clearly fabricated, were cropped to look intensely personal. They even paid some guy to pose as my lover and swear we'd been sneaking around for 2 years. My blood ran hot with rage. They weren't just trying to take my daughter from me. They were trying to annihilate my character. Their plan was to paint me as an unfaithful wife, to justify kicking me out and seizing all our assets. On the financial front, Ethan claimed all our savings came from his commissions, and my salary barely covered my own personal spending. He demanded half of my inherited stock portfolio, arguing its value grew because of his investment advice. He shamelessly lied about Margaret, controlling my finances for the past 5 years. I looked at Ethan and his mother, and a wave of nausea hit me. How could 2 people be so utterly rotten? They wanted to strip me down to the bone, but they forgot one crucial thing. I'm a project manager. I could sacrifice for my family, but when my back is against the wall, I know exactly how to fight. I took a deep breath and gave my lawyer the nod, calmly. He opened his briefcase and laid out the truth I had carefully documented. First, to counter the cheating claims, we showed the court the server logs from my company's internal chat, proving those conversations were in group channels about project deadlines. Then we presented the synced tablet I found, showing Ethan's texts, admitting the baby was his, and Margaret's messages telling him to kick me out. The fake witness, after a few pointed questions from my lawyer, started sweating, stammered, and finally admitted he was paid $500 for the lie. Next, the finances. We had the digital records from my bank account for the last 5 years. While Margaret made me transfer the money, everything was timestamped. I proved my monthly transfers to her, perfectly matched the deposits she made into a secret savings account, which I had managed to get a statement for. Crucially, the stocks were in a prenuptial trust, explicitly gifted to Clara Martin before we were ever married. By law, that was my separate property. Ethan had no claim to a single share. After reviewing the evidence, the court threw out every single one of his ridiculous demands. I was granted sole custody of Maya, and Ethan was ordered to pay child support. The stock portfolio was confirmed as mine alone. I lost the money transferred, unable to prove she managed it against my will, so I lost 5 years of my salary. But I got my daughter back, I got my name back, and that felt like the biggest win of my life. Walking out of the courthouse, Margaret, pale with fury about the stocks, sneered at me. Enjoy it. Think you were going to be happy now? You'll be miserable your whole life, stuck with that little brat. Ethan glared at me with pure hatred. You think, you're so clever, but this isn't a victory. Without me, you're just a single mom with baggage. What man will ever want you now? I looked both of them dead in the eye and gave them a real smile. Thanks for the concern. Maybe you should worry about your precious Jessica and her baby. For me, getting out of that house was the best thing that ever happened to me. I hugged my daughter tight and got in my car. I left their faces, twisted with greed and anger, in my rearview mirror. The gates of hell had finally closed. A whole new life was starting right now. And even if it was hard, at least the air I was breathing was free. 3 months, 90 days. Isn't very long. But for someone ready to climb out of a pit, it's more than enough time to rewrite your future. Those first few weeks after the divorce were brutal. I found a small apartment for me and my daughter, suddenly playing the role of both parents, with all the financial weight on my shoulders. At night, holding my daughter, I'd cry silently into my pillow, the wounds from the betrayal still raw. Ethan's affair and Margaret's cruelty haunted my dreams, but every single morning, Maya's bright smile was my promise to myself. You will not fall apart. You will not give them the satisfaction of seeing you fail. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's building a life so much better than the one you left behind. I dove into my work with everything I had, with my experience, and no longer being drained by drama at home. My focus was razor sharp. I landed 3 huge back-to-back contracts for the company. My bosses took notice, and I was promoted to Director of Product Development, with a salary to match. With that money, I started investing in me. I chopped off my long, neglected hair for a sharp, stylish bob. I tossed out the frumpy clothes. Margaret insisted. I wear and bought tailored suits that actually fit my body. I started going to yoga, taking care of my skin, and learning how to wear a little makeup. The woman in the mirror was someone I hadn't seen in years, confident, energetic, and alive. My eyes, once dull with sadness, now had a spark. Guys at work and from other firms started asking me out, but I would just smile. My heart needed time to heal. My energy was for my daughter and for myself. And while my life was getting brighter every day, across town, Ethan S. world was beginning to crumble. I started hearing whispers from mutual acquaintances that he was in deep trouble. After the divorce, he had smugly moved Jessica right into our old house. Margaret was ecstatic, treating her new, pregnant daughter-in-law like a princess. But that fairy tale didn't last long. Ethan took all his savings and borrowed heavily to fund a boutique influencer agency for Jessica. She had this fantasy of being the boss, doing nothing but collecting checks. But Jessica was all style and no substance. She was lazy and had no business. Instead of focusing on clients, she blew the startup capital on a lavish office and designer clothes. 2 months in, the agency had no clients. The work was shoddy. The money ran out, and the high-interest loans started calling. Ethan was drowning in debt. To make things worse, his day job started to suffer, distracted by the failing business and Jessica's constant demands. He dropped the ball on a major account, costing his company a fortune. He was demoted, and his salary was cut in half. With money gone, the mood in that big house turned toxic. The happy chatter about the future was replaced by shouting matches and slammed doors. One afternoon, I ran into Ethan at the grocery store. He was pushing Jessica's cart, looking thin, unshaven, and wearing a stained sweatshirt. Jessica was beside him, complaining loudly that he couldn't afford some expensive imported cheese she wanted. Then he saw me, his ex-wife, in a chic blazer, looking confident and laughing with our happy daughter. Ethan was so stunned, he actually dropped the bottle of wine he was holding. It shattered on the floor. Eyes were a mix of shock, regret, and utter humiliation. I walked right past him like he was a stranger, without saying a single word. In that moment, I knew I had truly won. Not because I had more money, but because I had finally reclaimed the person lost while I was with him, and their free fall was just beginning. When the startup money disappeared, so did the affection. The mistress, Amber, who Brenda once paraded around like a prize, finally showed her cards a ruthless, shameless gold digger. A whole new kind of mother-in-law versus daughter-in-law war was brewing, and believe me, it was 1,000 times worse than anything I ever dealt with. While I was finally living my best life, across town in that high-rise where I wasted my 20s, a complete disaster played out daily. I didn't have to look for updates. You know how it is bad news has wings. Old neighbours, who always hated Brenda's smug attitude, couldn't wait to fill me in. They said since Amber arrived, Brenda looked like she de-aged a decade. She used to resent me for being capable and organised, making her feel small. But now she was learning what happens when you let a viper into your nest. Amber, 4 months pregnant, moved in and got the Queen treatment. But the second I was officially out of the picture, that sweet, gentle mask came right off. It turned out Amber was a lazy, disrespectful, professional freeloader. She'd roll out of bed around noon, and as for cleaning or cooking, not a chance. She wouldn't even rinse her own cereal bowl. Brenda, what's for breakfast? I made those organic pancakes. No, too many carbs. Craving something special, like poached salmon with hollandaise. I know it's a lot, but your grandson needs the omega-3s. Go down to that fancy market on Rush Street and get me the good stuff. Amber would just lounge on the sofa, scrolling on her phone, barking orders at Brenda. The very same Brenda who made me get up at 5 a.m. to grind fresh coffee beans now had to run around like a delivery driver for her new daughter-in-law's whims. Brenda finally muttered, with a little bitterness, "You know, even when you're pregnant, a little movement is good. Lying around all day makes for a difficult delivery." She just had to add, Clara was scrubbing floors right up until her water broke. Hearing my name, Amber shot up and stared her down. "Don't you dare compare me to his boring little ex. I am carrying the heir to this family. If you miss her so much, why don't you call her back to be your maid?" "I'm tired, I can't." Brenda was stunned into silence. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way. But thinking of Amber's pregnant belly and the grandson she craved, she bit her tongue and played the part of the servant. And besides being lazy, Amber burned through money like it was her job, while Liam's startup was cratering, bleeding investor cash and racking up debt. Amber spent money as if they just iPod. Every day, more boxes from luxury stores showed up the money. She squeezed it out of Liam. If he said no, she'd start a massive fight, threaten to leave, or claim the stress was bad for the baby and that he was making her depressed. Liam, totally under her spell and too proud to admit he was broke, started borrowing from loan sharks just to fund her lifestyle. The whole thing blew up one night when the heavies he'd borrowed from, to keep the start-up afloat, showed up at the front door, looking to collect their interest. Liam wasn't there, so Brenda had to face them, humiliating herself and begging for just a few more days. When she came back inside, shaking, she found Amber doing an Instagram live, showing off a new haul of luxury skincare. That was it. Brenda snapped. She lunged, ripped the phone out of Amber's hand and threw it on the ground, screaming, "What is wrong with you? Your husband is sinking in debt. I'm out there begging loan sharks. And you're in here playing influencer. Are you trying to destroy this family?" Amber saw her phone screen was shattered and just lost it. She stood up and shoved Brenda hard, sending her stumbling back into the edge of the coffee table. "You crazy old witch! You broke my phone? That's my husband's money he gives me to spend. What business is it of yours? If this family goes down, it's because your son is a pathetic failure, not because of me. I'm doing him a favour, having his baby without a ring or any real commitment, and you want to lecture me?" Brenda, clutching her back in pain, stared in horror at the woman she once called clever and delightful. "You dare put your hands on me? You classless tramp. I am kicking you out of my house. Kick me out." Amber laughed, a nasty, twisted smile on her face. "Go ahead. I'll walk right out of here with your precious grandson. Enjoy watching your family name die out. And don't forget, that startup, even failing, is legally registered in my name. I sell off the assets right now. Who really loses everything?" Just then, Liam stumbled in, reeking of whiskey. Seeing his mother on the floor and his wife standing over her, he rushed between them. "Stop! Both of you, just stop! Are you trying to kill me?" he screamed. Brenda grabbed onto her son's legs, sobbing. "Liam, she pushed me. She hit your own mother. Is this the creature you left Clara for?" Liam looked from his mother to Amber, his apartment now a war zone. He just dropped his hands, defeated. He couldn't yell at Amber. She held all the cards. But seeing his mom like this was killing him. "Amber, please," he begged. "Mother's an old woman," Liam said, his voice quiet. "Oh, you shut up, you gutless loser. Your mother attacks me, destroys my property, and you defend her? Fine. If you two are going to gang up on me, I'm done. I don't want this baby anyway." Amber stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. Brenda crumpled to the floor, wailing, as Liam just punched the wall, clutching his head. Just hearing the story was enough to make my skin crawl. It was almost poetic, really. Karma came for Brenda fast and hard, hitting her right where it hurt, most her pride and her obsession with the family name. Shed traded a decent daughter-in-law for a monster who now ruled her life. And just a week after that explosive fight, Liam's finances completely imploded. The startup had to shut down for good. With no way to pay, the loan sharks gave him a final warning. If he didn't have $35,000 cash in 3 days, they were coming to Brenda's condo to take everything. Liam desperately called old friends and contacts, but nobody would help him. The gossip had already made the rounds, how he'd left his wife for a younger woman, and driven his company into the ground. He was toxic. Cornered, Liam suddenly remembered a secret cash fund. It was money. He'd skimmed from my salary back when we were together, about $40,000. He'd hidden it in a small safe in the bedroom for a rainy day. That night, the rain was coming down in sheets, just like the night he threw me out. Liam, tortured by the looming deadline, stumbled home drunk again. He made a beeline for the bedroom, planning to grab that cash, pay off the loan sharks, and save his mother's home. But when he pushed open the door, he froze. The closet door was hanging open. All of Amber's designer clothes and handbags were gone. And then he saw it. The small safe in the corner was wide open and empty, not a single bill inside. Liam thought he was hallucinating from the booze. Shaking his head, he dropped to his knees, but it was hollow. Every last dollar, his only way out, was gone. On the nightstand, A note was scrawled in bright red lipstick. Liam, sorry, I can do this Brocklife thing with you. Think of the money as severance, pay for my time. I'm leaving the state. Don't try to find me. Goodbye, the blood drained from Liam's face. His legs gave out. Amber was gone. She hadn't just left him shed taken every last leaving him and his mother to face the wolves. That witch. Liam roared like an animal. He didn't even think. He just snatched his motorcycle keys and bolted out the door. Liam, where are you going in this storm? Brenda cried out. But all she saw was his silhouette vanish into the downpour. Liam tore through the empty streets like a man possessed. One thought hammered in his skull: find Amber. Get the money back. He guessed shed be heading for O'Hare or the bus terminal downtown. Rain whipped his face, whiskey blurred his vision, and pure rage blinded him. He gunned it through red lights, screaming curses into the wind. He was coming up on a massive intersection. The light went red, but Liam either didn't see it or didn't care. He twisted the throttle, trying to outrun the ghost of his mistake. Just then, an 18-wheeler hauling freight thundered through the green light. The truck's air horn blasted, a deafening sound followed by the shriek of tires hydroplaning on wet pavement. Then, an explosion of metal that drowned out the thunder. Liam's motorcycle was thrown 50 feet, disintegrating on impact. His body, limp like a rag doll, was flung through the air. It hit the slick blacktop hard, tumbled a few times, and then didn't move. A pool of dark red began to spread, mixing with the falling rain. His helmet, cracked in half, slid across the pavement. The truck driver, face white as a sheet, stumbled out of his cab. Cars stopped. A mess of shouts and screams for someone to call 911 cut through the noise. Liam just lay there, his eyes wide open, staring up at the empty black sky as the rain came down. Before he blacked out, images flooded his mind. He saw Sophia, his ex-wife, laughing with their little girl. He saw his elderly mother weeping at the front door, and he saw Chloe, cackling on a mountain of his cash. Then, just muddy darkness and a pain that shot through his bones. An hour later at Northwestern Memorial, a call from the Chicago police made Eleanor collapse. Sobbing, she grabbed a cab and raced to the hospital. But there, the doctor gave her even worse news, a blow that felt like a lightning strike from a clear sky. That night, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and the faint, coppery scent of blood. The emergency room hallway was bathed in cold, sterile light, filled with the rattle of gurneys. It was a chaotic mix of nurses shouting, patients moaning, and families weeping on the edge of life and death. Eleanor was just huddled in a corner. She was in tattered, rain-dampened pajamas, staring blankly at the operating room doors where her son fought for his life. The red light above the door glowed, as vivid as the blood on the pavement. A nurse with a clipboard called out, "Family for Mark Miller." Her voice sharp and urgent. Eleanor staggered to her feet, her hands and legs shaking so violently she almost fell. "I am his mother. How is he?" "The patient has massive internal bleeding and a severe traumatic brain injury. We're doing all we can, but his situation is critical. We need a deposit of $35,000 immediately for an emergency transfer and to bring in a private neurosurgeon. His insurance has lapsed. If we delay, we can't guarantee he'll survive." $35,000. That number felt like a 2,000-pound weight crushing her. "Wait, please. I'll call someone to bring the money." Eleanor begged through her tears. "Please hurry. Your son is hanging on by a thread." The nurse just turned and walked away, leaving Eleanor alone in her despair. With trembling hands, Eleanor pulled out her phone. She didn't call me first. In that moment, the first person she thought of wasn't her cast-off ex-daughter-in-law. It was the new one, the one carrying the family's supposed heir. Chloe. She dialed the number, but it just rang and rang, long and empty. The mobile subscriber you've dialed is not available. She tried again, 2, 3, 10 times, but only got that cold automated voice. She sent a text, but the truth was cruel. Chloe's account was gone, or she'd been blocked completely. That witch. Where did you go with my son's money? You've killed my boy, Chloe. Eleanor screamed, drawing pitiful looks from strangers. That's when she remembered Mark's last words before he'd stormed out. She ran away. She took all the money. Eleanor thought back. Chloe had always said she loved Mark, respected her, and promised her a grandson to carry on the family name. It was all a lie, a complete setup. Shed squeezed every dime from him, pushed him to borrow from loan sharks, and when he was tapped out, she emptied the safe and vanished. Oh my God, the betrayal. Son, my poor son, what a fool you've been, Eleanor cried, beating her chest in anguish. But the nightmare wasn't over. Her phone buzzed again, an incoming call from an unknown number. Hello? Eleanor answered, her voice a weak whisper. Eleanor, is that you? Your boy Mark is good at hiding. For a guy with so many debts, I hear he was in an accident. Dying, huh? A man's voice sneered. It was the loan sharks. Please, just leave us alone. My son is in surgery. I don't care if Hez in the or in hell, the man yelled. The money he owes me is real. If he dies, you pay. And just so you know, we're standing right outside your house. The bank may own the house, but we'll take the furniture. If you don't have $35,000, principal and interest by morning. My boys are going to clean the place out. Then we'll pay your son a little visit at the hospital, you'll see. Click. The line went dead. Eleanor's hand went limp, the phone crashing to the floor and cracking the screen. It was over. No son, no house, no money. Her perfect daughter-in-law had bolted, and now debt collectors were at her door. Eleanor felt her world collapsing. She scrolled through her contacts, but relatives either didn't answer or made excuses. Terrified Shed asked for cash. Her so-called friends, who were always around when things were good, now avoided her like the plague. In the middle of all this crushing agony, one name surfaced in her mind like a last desperate hope. Sophia. Yes, her former daughter-in-law, the one she had insulted and thrown out. But she remembered Sophia was kind, sentimental, and more importantly, Shed heard rumours that Sophia was a director now, making more money than she could possibly spend. If Shed's that rich, what's $35,000 to her? Mark is her daughter's father, after all. She wouldn't just stand by and let him die, would she? Eleanor clung to that shameless, selfish idea. She picked up her cracked phone and called me, trying to pressure me with a mix of her old mother-in-law authority and her new, raw desperation. And it all came crashing down with my simple question. And who are you? I shut her down, cold and final. When I hung up, Eleanor just sat there in the hospital hallway, completely stunned. Her last hope was gone. She looked at the operating room doors as tears streamed down her wrinkled face. For the first time, she felt truly, terrifyingly alone. She realized she and her son had single-handedly destroyed every ounce of goodwill, every possible lifeline, Sophia. I was wrong, she whispered, but that late apology was only heard by the cold hospital walls. However, Eleanor had no idea that on the other end of the line, I wasn't just going to sit back and do nothing. I sat in my living room, staring at the phone's dark screen. My tea was cold, but my heart felt like it was on fire. It wasn't concern for Mark. It was a complicated, messy knot of emotions. I told Eleanor I didn't care. I laughed at her nerve, but deep down I was curious. I wanted to see the final act of this tragedy they'd written for themselves. I wasn't about to play the hero Eleanor wanted. I needed to see the price they paid for their betrayal with my own 2 eyes. I wanted to witness the misery of the people who'd tossed me out onto the street, and I wanted them to see, without a doubt, exactly where Sophia stood today. I got up and walked to my closet. I didn't reach for my old, simple clothes. I chose a sleek, fitted black dress over it. I slipped on a chic cream blazer, pairing it with a designer bag and heels I'd bought myself after closing a huge deal. My makeup was subtle but sharp, finished with a slash of confident red on my lips. The woman in the mirror was successful, self-assured and proud. A world away from the frazzled Sophia, who smelled of kitchen grease just 1 year ago. "Honey, Mommy's going out for a bit. Be a good girl." I kissed Lily's forehead and headed out into the night. When I arrived at Northwestern Memorial, I stepped out of my car. The click of my heels echoed with purpose on the hospital floor, a sharp sound in the noisy, chaotic space. The strong smell of disinfectant made me wrinkle my nose. I remembered giving birth to Lily in a cheap clinic, with only my own mother by my side. That memory made my steps even firmer. In the distance I saw her, Eleanor, crumpled in a waiting room chair, with her head in her hands. She looked so tiny and pathetic. I almost mistook her for a homeless person. I walked over and stopped right in front of her. My shadow fell over her, blocking out the harsh light. Eleanor sensed someone and slowly raised her head. Her eyes were swollen, red, and completely vacant. She saw an elegant woman looking down at her, and it took her a few seconds to recognize me. "Sophia. Is that you, Sophia? You came." Like a drowning woman spotting a raft, Eleanor jumped up and reached for my hand. "Did you bring the money?" "Oh, thank God, thank God." "Quick. The doctor needs the payment now." I took a small but firm step back, pulling my hand away as if she were something unclean. "Calm down," I said, my voice cold and flat. "I didn't come here to pay for anything." Eleanor's hand froze in midair. Her desperate smile collapsed, replaced by shock and then rising anger. "What? What are you talking about? If you didn't bring the money, then why are you here to gloat?" "Yes," I answered, looking her dead in the eye with brutal honesty. "I came to see what karma looks like up close. To see the woman who threw me and my things out into a rainstorm, now sitting here, and to see the man who beat his wife for his mistress, now lying in there. You devil," Eleanor shrieked, pointing a shaky finger at me. "He's in there, dying. How could you say that? You were his wife." "Oh," I laughed, "it seems you forget. 3 months ago, you and your son made sure to take that title away from me. Right now, I'm just a woman who was passing by, and a stranger has zero obligation to save the man who destroyed her." I leaned in close, my voice a whisper she couldn't escape. "Margaret, the $35,000 you need isn't a lot to me. I could cover it with a single phone call, but I want. Do you have any idea?" Why, she just stared at me, completely stunned. You could see the fear finally creeping into her eyes. "Because I would rather give that money to a dog shelter than save a snake like your son. At least a dog is grateful when you feed it. You and David just bite the hand that offers help. Now get out. Get out of my sight." Margaret, sputtering with rage, fell back into the chair, clutching at her heart and fighting for breath. Just then, the emergency room doors opened and a doctor came out, pulling off his mask with a grim look. He called out, "The family of David Miller?" Margaret looked too weak to even move. I glanced at her, then turned to the doctor. That's her. What's the prognosis? Doctor the doctor. Assuming I was family, just shook his head sadly. We've stopped the internal bleeding, but the brain trauma is catastrophic. Barring some kind of miracle, he's likely to remain in a vegetative state for the rest of his life. On top of that, the ICU costs are going to be absolutely massive. We're talking several $1,000s per day. The family needs to prepare, both emotionally and financially. A vegetative state. The words hit like a judge's sentence. He wasn't really alive, but he wasn't dead either. Just a body, an empty shell, left as a permanent burden on everyone else. When she heard those words, Margaret's eyes rolled back in her head, and she fainted right there in the chair. Nobody moved to catch her. A couple of nurses had to rush over to help. I just watched the chaos. I saw the woman who once barked orders now just a powerless heap, and the ICU doors where David would now lie, tangled in tubes. I didn't feel the victory I expected. All I felt was a deep emptiness and a strange kind of pity for a life wasted on greed. They'd spent all their energy trying to swindle me out of my inheritance, a little bit of cash, and now all they had was a dark future and empty pockets. I was about to walk away. I'd seen what I came for. I'd seen their downfall. But after just a few steps, a cold, shaking hand suddenly grabbed my ankle. I spun around, shocked. Margaret was awake, but she wasn't in the chair anymore. She had crawled on the floor to get to me. She threw her arms around my legs and looked up, her face a mess of tears and desperation. The pride and arrogance were gone. Clara, please, I'm begging you, please save my son. She then pressed her forehead to the cold hospital floor. Thump, thump, I was wrong. I'm a foolish old woman. I was horrible to you. I'm the one who should die, but David's still young. Clara, you have the money, please show him some mercy. Give him a chance to live a real life again. I swear I'll pay back every penny, even if I have to beg on the street or work, until I'll be your slave for the rest of my life. A woman in her 60s in the middle of a hospital, on her knees before a young woman, banging her head on the linoleum floor. Everyone who passed by stopped to stare and whisper. Some of them probably thought I was a cruel, heartless daughter. Others might have guessed the real story. I looked down at Margaret, the woman who made me get on my knees to scrub her floors, who watched every bite I took, and now here she was at my feet. For just a second, I actually felt a flicker of pity and almost gave in. But then the part of me that had endured so much abuse whispered, don't you fall for it. Promises from people like her only last as long as they're trapped. Get up. Stop this performance, I said. My voice still cold, but maybe a little less sharp. How exactly would you pay me back? You're about to be homeless, and your son is a vegetable. Could you possibly pay me with? Margaret, choking on sobs, couldn't even form a sentence. Lying on the floor before my shoes, she just clasped her hands and kept pleading. Clara, I know you hate me and David. I know what I did was wrong, but please, there's an old saying about forgiving those who repent. We were a family once, after all. We shared a dinner table for 5 years. Don't you remember anything? When you first married him, I took you to the farmer's market. I taught you how to make that pot roast. You loved so much. How can you just forget all of that kindness? I stopped and stared at the woman grovelling at my feet. Kindness. She was actually trying to bring up what she considered fond memories. I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My cold laugh echoed down the hospital corridor. Margaret, you have a very selective memory. You remember the pot roast, but you forget who had to get up at 5 a.m. to prepare it all. You remember taking me to the market, but you forget screaming that I was a wasteful idiot because I bought carrots that cost 50 cents more. I crouched down to look her right in the eye, my voice rising. We ate at the same table for 5 years. You're right about that. And for 5 years, I ate my dinner with a side of tears. Remember that table? Whenever we had chicken, the breast and thighs all went to your son, and I got the neck and the scraps. You said a wife needed to watch her figure. Did you forget that too? Margaret, stunned into silence, looked away from my glare, but she kept mumbling. That's just how I was raised. If I was hard on you, it was only because I wanted to prepare you to be a good wife. I never meant any harm. David was wrong to put his hands on you, but you know how men are. He has a temper. Now he's lying in there, fighting for his life. Clara, please. To a wealthy woman like you, $35,000 is nothing. If you save him, we can be a family again. I will welcome you back as my daughter-in-law. I'll get rid of that Amber girl, and you can be the mistress of the house. Even now, even in this mess, she was still lost in her fantasies of being in charge. She really believed that being her daughter-in-law was some prize. I was still desperate to win. Shut your mouth, I snapped, my disgust boiling over. Don't you dare talk to me like. You're doing me some great favour. You think I want your bankrupt house. You think I want that cheating, useless man lying in there. I pulled out a tissue, wiped my mouth, and continued in the iciest voice I could find. You were tough on me to make me better. No, Margaret, you weren't tough. You were a monster. You treated me like a slave. You took my entire paycheck. You insulted my family. And then the final act, that rainy night, you and your son threw me and my daughter out like trash, just because I refused to sell my family's property to fund his affair. That isn't a lesson. That is a deep, ugly cruelty that runs in your family's blood. Margaret was shaking all over. Every word I said was a blade, cutting through her years of denial, that I should save that man. I pointed to the ICU. Why would I save the man who nearly killed me when you tossed me out in a storm with a child and no money? Did you pity me when your son smashed my head against the wall? Did you try to stop him? No, you stood there and cheered him on. Margaret's voice broke into sobs. She couldn't say another word. This is what karma looks like. Margaret, the pain your son is in right now, the nightmare you are living through is the bill coming due for your actions. Don't blame fate. Blame yourselves. I stood up tall and smoothed out my jacket. The whole fight had left me drained, but it also felt like lancing a wound idea, carried for years. I'd said everything, but Margaret, in her desperation, was still grasping at straws. Even though it already destroyed everyone, she practically covered her ears, refusing to accept it. Fine, I was wrong. David was wrong. But the baby, Clara, the baby that Amber is carrying, that baby is still this family's blood. How can you just stand by and let its father die? Let it be born without a dad. You're a mother. You have to have pity on an innocent child. She was using the baby again. She thought if she appealed to my maternal side, to my basic decency, I would crack. But she had no idea that the truth about that child was the one thing that would shatter her world completely, the final fatal blow that would extinguish her last bit of hope. I looked at Margaret. My anger finally gave way to a deep, profound pity for a woman who was a fool right to the very end. You really want to know the truth about that precious baby boy? Fine. I'll show you, so you can finally see what's real. So you know exactly what your son threw his life away for. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and opened the folder a private detective sent me 2 days ago. I held the bright screen right in front of Margaret's confused face. On it were a series of crystal clear photos and screenshots of text messages. Look closely. This woman is your darling new daughter-in-law, Amber. This man is a famous tech investor from Chicago who happens to be married. The first picture showed Amber and some heavy-set man in an embrace at a luxury resort. You can see the date on the photo. 6 months ago. Can you do the math? 6 months ago, she was on vacation with this man. Meanwhile, your son David was still at home with me, playing the part of a devoted husband. I swiped to the next image. It was Amber's ultrasound from a private clinic. Look at the estimated due date, Margaret. This baby is already over 22 weeks. That's more than 5 months. But your son has only been with her for 3. Do you understand what that means? Margaret's eyes were glued to the screen, her lips moving without a sound. No, that's impossible. She claimed she was 3 months pregnant. Her bump was tiny. She played you, I sneered. That woman is a master manipulator. She knows all the tricks to hide a baby bump, and this is the best part. I tilted the iPad, showing the chat between Isabella and her friend. The words on the screen were the most brazen confession you could imagine. Im knocked up by some rich old client. The guy's terrified of his wife, finding out and won't own up to it. He gave me $5,000 to take care of it, but Im worried. My doctor said another abortion could make me infertile. So what's the plan? Keep it. I'm working on this new mark right now. His name is Alex. He's an only child, owns a sick Marina District condo, and his mother is desperate for a grandson. This architect is a total pushover, so easy to trick. A few compliments on his genius designs and hell eat out of my hand. I'm going to convince him this baby is his. He'll get a place to stay, money, and his mother Brenda shall lose her mind with happiness. Maybe she'll finally toss out the tech wife and I can move right in. When the last message loaded, Brenda looked like she'd seen a ghost. She crumpled to the cold hospital floor, clutching her head in her hands. Her mouth gaped open, but no sound escaped. Her entire world, her family pride, the dream of a male heir, every excuse she'd made for her awful behaviour, it all just burst like a fragile bubble. She was about to be the punchline of an old, cruel joke. Her son Alex was the target of the most humiliating con of his life. He threw away his marriage, his family, his integrity, all for some grifter. And for what? To end up raising some other guy's kid. He used the money Clara earned from her startup, funds he basically stole, to wine and dine a woman pregnant with a stranger's baby. And the worst part, after she confessed and bolted, he got drunk and wrapped his Porsche around a pole. He was lying in that bed, broken and dying, all for a complete fabrication, a pointless, selfish end. Oh, Alex, my boy, how could you be so stupid? I did this to you, Brenda shrieked, a raw, guttural cry, as she slammed her head on the linoleum floor. This time, her tears weren't for show. This was the crushing agony of a mother realizing she'd driven her own son to ruin. She let a viper into his life, helped her wreck his marriage, threw out a devoted wife, and brought disaster to their door. Do you finally see? I asked, slipping the iPad back into my bag and staring down at her with cold pity. This is the reality you need to accept. There is no grandson, there is no sweet new daughter. There is only the foolishness and greed of you and your son. Clara, please, save him. He was an idiot. But here's my son. Brenda tried to crawl towards me again, but all her strength was gone. Her voice was just a ragged whisper. I glanced one last time towards the ICU doors. Alex deserved consequences, but seeing him dying over a lie, I felt a small sting of pity. but pity wasn't going to make me responsible for him again. Brenda, I can't pay the $50,000. That money is for my daughter's future, the future of the granddaughter you treated so poorly. But I won't just let you rot here. I pulled a business card from my purse and pressed it into Brenda's trembling hand. This is a foundation that helps accident victims. My company is one of their biggest corporate sponsors. I'll make a call and ask them to look into Alex's situation. If you're lucky, they'll cover some of the costs. You'll have to handle the rest on your own. Sell the condo, get a loan, cash in your stocks. That's your problem now. This is all the help you're getting from me with that. I turned on my heel and left without another word. Behind me, I could hear Brenda's voice calling out, "Clara, I'm so sorry, I really am." But I kept walking. A chilly San Francisco fog rolled in as I pushed through the hospital doors, but despite the cold, I felt a strange warmth inside. I knew I'd done the right thing. I didn't let them die out of spite, but I wasn't going to be their fool ever again. I gave them the truth, and the truth was a harsher sentence than anything I could have come up with. Life has a way of balancing the books. Alex would now either be gone forever or live as a shadow of his former self. That was the cost of his betrayal. Isabella ran off with her payday, but stolen money never brings peace. And Brenda, she'd spend the rest of her days in a self-made prison of regret and isolation. As for me, I gazed up at the clear, starry sky. Tomorrow, I'd drop Mia off at school and head to the office, fired up and ready to go. I was going to build a fantastic, independent, happy life because I earned it. Leaving the UCSF Medical Center, the night behind me felt darker than before. Ambulance sirens still cried in the distance, but I felt completely at peace. I had left Brenda to drown in her own cruel truth and overwhelming grief. Then my pace slowed. It wasn't regret, and I had zero intention of marching back in there to pay that $50,000 to save the man who betrayed me. That money represented my hard work. It was Maya's future. I would never ever spend a dime of it on the person who nearly destroyed both of our lives. Yet deep down, my conscience wouldn't let it go. I wasn't like them, even if they were my enemies. My own self-respect wouldn't let me be cruel enough to just let a life slip away over money. I stopped by my car and pulled out my phone. I didn't call Brenda. I dialed a trusted board member from my company, a man named Mr. Harrison, head of the Golden Gate Relief Fund. "Mr. Harrison, it's Clara. I'm so sorry to call you this late." Yes, there was a critical patient over at our CSEF. A young man, terrible car crash, and his family has very little. Apparently, his elderly mother is beside herself. They were just scammed out of everything they had. They can't even cover the deposit for the surgery. I took a steadying breath and kept my voice even. I was hoping you could look at his case for emergency aid. I can vouch for the situation. Yes, just whatever is standard procedure. No, please. Don't mention my name. Just tell them you heard about it from your hospital contacts. After hanging up, a wave of relief washed over me. It was the final decent thing I could do for Alex. I didn't use my own money, but I used my reputation to give him a chance. I wasn't doing it for him, or for any old feelings. I was doing it to build a better world for my daughter, Mia, to grow up in. I wanted to always be able to look my daughter in the eye and say I did the right thing, that I have nothing to be ashamed of. I glanced back toward the hospital entrance. Brenda was still slumped on the bench, clutching that business card. She looked so small and broken, like a dried-up leaf in a hurricane. She was never going to get $50,000 from me, Yeez. The burden of his life was now hers to bear alone. she would have to sell that Marina District condo she was always so proud of to cover his debts and the hospital bills. That was the price of her choices. I opened my car door and slid into the driver's seat. The familiar scent of my perfume in the car washed away the hospital's sterile smell. In the rear-view mirror, my face looked weary, but my eyes were full of determination. "Goodbye to all that," I whispered. The engine purred to life, and the car moved smoothly onto the quiet street. I thought of Mia, sound asleep in her bed at home. When she woke up in the morning, I'd tell her a new kind of fairy tale. One about a queen who fought off a greedy monster to protect her and her princess's castle. I will teach my daughter that kindness is a superpower, but you have to choose who deserves it. I'll teach her to never let anyone diminish her value, and to always have her own safety net financial freedom. Because when life gets turbulent, the only thing you can truly rely on is yourself and the security you've built. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in ages. The 7-year nightmare was finally over, with one clean, decisive break. I had cut the toxic ties that bound me. But the story wasn't over. Time passed quickly, bringing changes no one could have predicted. And karma, the ultimate accountant, always settles the bill. 2 years later, on a chilly New Year's Eve in San Francisco, the city was alive with holiday preparations. I stood in my office on the 30th floor, gazing out at the glittering city lights. A sleek plaque on my desk read Clara Evans, Chief Executive Officer. In those 2 years, I never slowed down. I went from being a wife kicked to the curb by her husband and his mother to being the CEO of my own successful tech firm. I bought a stunning penthouse overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge and moved my parents into a beautiful home nearby. Mia, now a bright first grader at a top private school, was becoming a clever, confident young girl. My life was finally peaceful and happy. I took amazing trips with my friends and cherished my absolute, total freedom. Plenty of successful men asked me out, but I wasn't interested. I was enjoying my life as a strong single woman too much. On the afternoon of New Year's Eve, I was driving to pick up some last-minute party supplies. While stopped at a traffic light on busy Market Street, I saw something on the sidewalk that made my blood run cold. In the gleaming restroom of a 5-star hotel, an old woman with snow-white hair was on her hands and knees scrubbing the marble floor. Her uniform was frayed, her hands raw. She was trying to spoon some applesauce into the mouth of a man, slumped in an old wheelchair beside her. He was rail-thin, his limbs twisted awkwardly. His vacant eyes stared at nothing as drool stained the cheap bib on his chest. Though years of hardship had carved new lines on their faces, I knew them instantly. It was Diana and Ethan. The accident didn't kill him. Emergency surgery saved his body, but the brain injury left him paralyzed. He couldn't speak or think clearly, basically a living ghost. A helpless child trapped inside the shell of the man he once was. He was totally dependent, needing someone for everything, from feeding to bathing.
And Diana, after selling their downtown Austin condo at a huge loss to cover the debts and medical fees,
had nothing left. The little money that remained barely paid for a grimy apartment in the worst part of town. The woman who was once so proud and controlling was now a full-time caretaker for her broken son. From the silence of a restroom stall, I watched. "Please, sweetheart. Just one more bite." "Mommy needs you to eat," Diana begged, her voice raw and cracking with tears. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon, but a sudden spasm shot through his body, knocking the container from her hand. Applesauce splattered over them. Diana just broke down. Wiping it off his shirt, she sobbed, "Oh God, why is this my life? I wish you'd died in that crash. It would have been a mercy. Isabella, damn you to hell. You destroyed my family." Ethan just sat there, making guttural sounds, tears leaking from his empty eyes. Maybe somewhere deep inside his broken mind, he felt the regret, but he couldn't speak or move to fix anything. He was a prisoner in his own skin, forced to watch his mother suffer every single day because of his choices. A fate worse than death itself. Watching them, the burning hatred in my heart cooled into a quiet sadness for how fast lives can unravel. Id heard whispers that Isabella, the prized new fiancée, had been dumped by her tech investor boyfriend in San Jose. He discovered her lies and took back every single penny she'd stolen. Now she's supposedly broke, hiding out somewhere near the border. It's true what they say, you reap what you sow. They tried to ruin me, to take everything I had, but their own greed sent them spiraling into a hole they couldn't climb out of. Diana suddenly looked up, and her eyes fixed on my designer, clutch on the counter. Couldn't see my face, but she saw the luxury she craved and had lost. Her expression was a mix of envy, regret, and pure despair. It would never occur to her that the owner of that purse was the daughter-in-law shed, called worthless and kicked to the curb. I quietly walked out, washing my hands at the sink without a word. I left them there, a miserable tableau in the middle of a palace of wealth. I didn't offer them money or confront them with their past. My silence, my simple act of walking away, said everything. We were living in two completely different universes now. I walked back to my table. My parents and my little girl Ava were waiting for me to accept my award. As I approached, Ava ran and threw her arms around my legs. "Mommy, you're back. They're about to call your name." I knelt and hugged her tight, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. The warmth of real family filled me. "I'm here, sweetie." Looking at the table, at my parents beaming with pride and my beautiful daughter, I smiled. This was real happiness. Not built on schemes and betrayal, but on love, integrity, and resilience. And so, dear friends, we come to the end of this chapter in the lives of Olivia, Ethan, and Diana. The scent of bleach, a mother's desperate sobs, and a successful woman returning to her loving family. All these images stick with us, stirring up feelings that are hard to put into words. One story might be over, but for all of us, it opens up 1,000 questions about the twists of life, our own responsibilities, and the search for genuine happiness in this chaotic world we all share. So today, let's sit down and really think about what this story means, and pull out the tough but valuable lessons for our own lives, so we can live with more peace and self-respect. The first and biggest lesson here is about cause and effect. How it works fairly, but sometimes brutally. We've all heard the phrase, "You reap what you sow." But seeing what happened to Diantana's family really makes you respect that unchangeable law of the universe. Karma isn't some magical punishment. It's just the natural outcome of the choices we make and the energy we put out into the world. Diana and Ethan planted seeds of pure greed, selfishness, and betrayal, and eventually they were forced to eat the bitter fruit of their own making. The sight of Ethan, trapped in that wheelchair, unable to function, is a punishment more chilling than death. He's a prisoner in his own body, forced to witness his mother's daily struggle. That's the price he paid. And Diana, stripped of her arrogance, now spends her final years in shame, cleaning toilets to care for her son. The lesson here couldn't be clearer. You can't build your happiness on someone else's pain. Anything you gain through shady methods will eventually disappear. Living with kindness and integrity isn't just nice, it's the best defense you have against the inevitable storms of life. But the real highlight of this story is Olivia's incredible comeback. She stands for the strength, dignity, and independence of the modern woman. She pulled herself out of that dark place, wiped her tears, and completely took control of her own story. The lesson Olivia teaches is to be independent and rely on yourself. Never put your life or your happiness in someone else's control. When you are financially independent, you have a voice, you earn respect, and you have the power to choose your path. Turn your pain into power. The way Olivia handled that encounter in the hotel teaches us everything about self-respect and quiet dignity. She didn't seek revenge or gloat over their downfall. Her silence wasn't about them. It was about protecting her own peace. Letting go of hate doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means you accept it and move on. Life is too short and unpredictable to waste energy on old grudges. Focus on taking care of today. Love yourself. Take care of your body and mind. Keep learning and invest your time in the people who genuinely care about you. No matter how bad things get, if you refuse to give up and keep moving forward with integrity, there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. Just look at Olivia, who turned her biggest tragedy into the fuel she needed to fly. If this story connected with you, and if you found a lesson here that feels true, please help us share these ideas. Giving this video a like really helps us out, and sharing it might be exactly what someone out there needs to see today. And of course, please subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. I'll be back soon with another powerful story from life. Your support is what keeps this channel going and allows us to share messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening. May you find peace in your heart, warmth in your home, and love in your life. Take care.